Hi, welcome to DinMo Talks podcast. I'm Dan from DinMo, and today's episode is called All About Hybrid CDPs. We're breaking down what a hybrid customer data platform actually is and whether it truly offers the best of both worlds between packaged and composable systems. I'll be diving into these crucial data choices with my AI colleague. All right, I'll leave you with the discussion. Welcome to DinMo Talks podcast. I'm Dan from DinMo, your host for today's episode. I'm joined by my AI colleague, and together we'll explore today's topic. So I want you to imagine spending millions of dollars building this state-of-the-art vault to protect your most valuable asset.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right. It's perfectly organized, highly secure, optimized for access. And then you pay a third-party vendor to constantly sneak into that vault, photocopy the asset, reformat it, and just leave those copies lying around in a rented storage unit across town.
Just so one department can look at it.
Exactly. To make any sense at all.
I mean, it sounds completely irrational when you put it like that, but the crazy thing is that dynamic, that exact photocopying process is precisely how modern businesses are managing their customer data right now.
Yeah, it really is.
They are absolutely swimming in behavioral events, transactions, user profiles, and they're caught in this brutal tug of war between two opposing forces.
The classic marketing versus IT battle.
Exactly. Marketing needs the efficiency to actually use that data for personalized campaigns, right? But the engineering and data teams are desperately trying to maintain a secure, clean, unified technical infrastructure.
And that friction between, marketing agility and technical governance, that's what spawned this entire industry of customer data platforms or CDPs.
Right.
But the architecture of these platforms is going through a massive identity crisis right now. We're seeing this very trendy industry compromise hitting the market, the hybrid CDP.
Yeah, the so-called best of both worlds.
Right. But to figure out if this is actually a breakthrough or just a massive architectural trap, we really need to pull apart the mechanics of where we started.
Which means looking at the baseline it evolved from, the traditional or packaged CDP.
Right. We're talking about the legacy giants here, right? Platforms like Adobe or Salesforce Audience Studio.
Exactly. These were built as pre-configured all-in-one solutions. They collect, they unify, and they store customer data. But the critical mechanical flaw here is that they do all of this entirely within their own proprietary databases.
Okay, but wait. If I'm a CMO, I honestly don't care where the database sits.
You don't?
No, I don't care about engineering headaches or database hosting. I just want a clean user interface where I can, click a few buttons, build a segment of users who abandoned their carts yesterday, and push that campaign live by Friday.
That's completely fair.
Right. So why should the marketing team care if the data is vendor hosted, as long as it gets the clicks?
Well, the marketing team starts to care the exact moment their campaign metrics completely decouple from reality.
Oh, right. The data mismatch.
Exactly. When a traditional CDP ingests data, it forces that data into a rigid, vendor-defined schema. Their legacy software fundamentally can't read your internal data warehouse.
You have to constantly move it.
Right. You have to extract your data, transform it to fit their specific little boxes, and load it into their system.
Which means the company is suddenly running two parallel brains.
Two brains, yeah. This is the concept of dual governance. Your BI team is looking at the core internal data warehouse, analyzing raw transactional data. But meanwhile, your marketing team is inside the CDP, looking at a copied, transformed, and usually delayed subset of that data.
So you lose your single source of truth instantly.
Exactly.
Let's ground that in a real scenario for the listener. So imagine a Black Friday sale.
Oh, the ultimate stress test.
Right. Marketing launches a massive discount campaign through this traditional CDP. The CDP's dashboard, which is running on its own proprietary calculation engine, says, hey, the campaign drove 10,000 conversions.
And the CMO is thrilled.
Thrilled, popping champagne. But then the chief data officer pulls the actual transactional numbers from the main database, and BI says, no, we only processed 8,000 validated sales.
And that discrepancy happens because the two systems process logic completely differently.
Exactly. Marketing might be tracking like a click on a submit button via a front-end event in the CDP.
While BI is tracking a cleared credit card transaction in the warehouse.
Right. So instead of optimizing the campaign, your executive team spends the next 3 weeks in a boardroom arguing over whose dashboard is mathematically accurate.
Which is a huge waste of time. And on top of that, the compliance risks multiply exponentially.
Oh, the security side.
Yeah. When sensitive customer data like PII or behavioral data is duplicated and stored on a third-party vendor's servers, your attack surface literally doubles. If that vendor suffers a breach, it's your company's logo on the front page of the news.
And because traditional CDPs created this massive data duplication liability, data engineers eventually pushed back hard,
They absolutely did.
which caused the industry to swing in the exact opposite direction.
Yeah.
Enter the modern data stack and the birth of the composable or modular CDP.
And that paradigm shifted mainly because the underlying technology finally caught up. Historically, marketing needed those traditional CDPs because internal databases were just, well, they were too slow to query in real time.
Right, they couldn't handle the load.
But with the rise of highly scalable cloud data warehouses platforms like Snowflake, Google BigQuery, Databricks companies suddenly had these centralized data engines that separated compute from storage
They became incredibly fast.
and infinitely scalable.
So this composable CDP architecture comes along and basically says, stop moving the data. Leave it in the vault.
Exactly.
Instead of extracting and loading data into some third-party tool, a composable CDP connects directly to your existing cloud data warehouse. It operates on a strict zero-copy architecture.
Which is such a game changer.
It really is. It's like putting a really smart pair of glasses on top of your existing database. The marketer still gets the shiny drag-and-drop interface, but when they build an audience, the composable CDP simply translates those clicks into a SQL query.
And it pushes that query down into the warehouse.
Right, and executes it exactly where the data already lives.
The elegance of that mechanism really cannot be overstated. There's no fixed schema imposed by a vendor. There are no fragile extraction pipelines to maintain.
You just plug and play.
Yeah, you get immediate deployment because you aren't waiting 6 months to migrate data into a new system.
I do have to push back on the operational cost here, though.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because if a marketer is constantly tweaking audiences, testing variables, triggering campaigns, and every single one of those actions pushes a live SQL query down to Snowflake or BigQuery.
You're worried about the compute bill.
Yeah. Doesn't the company's compute bill absolutely explode? Cloud data warehouses charge for compute power. Querying a 10 million row database for every marketing whim sounds financially terrifying.
That is a very common fear, but it really misunderstands how modern zero-copy platforms actually execute. We aren't running massive brute force queries against raw, unstructured data every time a marketer clicks a button.
So how does it actually work?
The architecture utilizes things like materialized views and micro-batching. So your data engineering team creates highly optimized, pre-computed tables within the warehouse specifically for marketing use cases.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and the composable platform just queries those optimized tables. The compute cost ends up being pennies compared to what you spend elsewhere.
Right, compared to the cost of maintaining a traditional system.
Exactly. Think about the hidden costs of the traditional or hybrid models. You're paying for a massive team of data engineers whose sole job is to build and fix reverse ETL pipelines because they constantly break when an API changes.
And you're paying a premium software license to a vendor just to store a duplicate copy of data you already pay to store in your own warehouse.
Right. So when you eliminate those pipelines and the duplicate storage, the fraction of a cent you spend on optimized warehouse compute is a massive net savings.
And crucially, this architecture guarantees that elusive single source of truth. If a customer updates their email address or, makes a return, that hits the central warehouse.
And because the composable CDP queries that exact warehouse, marketing instantly sees the update.
BI and marketing are literally looking at the exact same row of data.
But human nature, especially in enterprise software procurement, hates a binary choice.
We always want a middle ground.
Always. You have these legacy companies realizing that the modern data stack is making their proprietary databases obsolete. But they can't just rewrite 20 years of back-end code overnight.
No, they still have their rigid, hard-coded UIs.
So the industry tries to play matchmaker to save these legacy systems, and that gives us the focal point of today's deep dive, the hybrid CDP.
The ultimate compromise.
Right. Vendors in this space, we're talking about companies like Treasure Data, Simon Data, ActionIQ, and Particle. They saw this composable wave coming.
And to adapt, they built connectors to the cloud data warehouse and started marketing themselves with terms like no copy or warehouse native.
Yeah, and this marketing spin is fascinating because it relies on a very specific technical loophole.
Oh, I love this part. They reassure clients by saying, hey, we're no copy because we don't duplicate your entire data warehouse. We just connect to it.
But the mechanics of what happens after they connect completely expose the illusion.
So walk us through that. Walk us through the actual ETL pipeline of a hybrid system. Let's say marketing wants to target high-value users who are at risk of churning. What actually happens to the data?
Well, in a hybrid model, the vendor's interface still requires data to conform to its proprietary model to even function. So the system queries your central cloud data warehouse.
Okay, so far so good.
But then it extracts the specific profiles and attributes needed for that campaign. It pulls that data across the network, transforms it to fit the vendor's required schema, and loads it into the vendor's internal storage layer.
Wait.
And only after it is stored in their system can the marketer actually use it to activate a campaign.
If they have to extract profiles, transform them, and load them into their own internal database just to make their UI work, that isn't no copy, that's just some copy.
It is entirely some copy. And from a systems engineering perspective, this mixed storage approach creates a deeply fragile dual infrastructure.
It really does.
The hybrid model introduces the worst elements of both worlds, all under the guise of flexibility.
It's like owning a state-of-the-art supercomputer, but your marketing team is forced to communicate with it via the postal service.
That's actually a perfect analogy.
The latency is baked right into the delivery method.
Yes, the batch synchronization latency these systems create is a huge problem. Because you're constantly extracting and loading data between two distinct storage environments, you are fundamentally restricted by sync schedules.
You aren't operating in real time.
Not at all. If a customer buys a pair of shoes online, that transaction hits your central data warehouse immediately. But if the hybrid CDP only syncs with the warehouse every 4 hours?
Oh no, that customer is going to spend the next 3 hours getting aggressively retargeted with ads for the exact shoes they just bought.
Exactly, which burns ad spend and annoys the customer.
And behind the scenes, your data engineers are still miserable. The hybrid vendor might sell the platform as a seamless bridge, but in reality, the IT team now has to maintain the ingest pipelines feeding the main data warehouse. Plus, monitor and debug the extraction pipelines feeding the hybrid CDP's internal storage.
And we are right back to dual governance. The moment data leaves your secure warehouse and sits in a vendor's proprietary storage, even if it's just some data, it's disconnected from the source.
The BI team is forecasting based on real-time warehouse data, and marketing is executing based on a localized, delayed snapshot.
Right.
So why do companies buy it? If the mechanics are this flawed, what is the actual real-world appeal?
The appeal often comes down to organizational maturity and legacy comfort. A hybrid model might actually suit a company with very low data maturity, like an organization that hasn't built a robust, centralized data warehouse yet and still relies on siloed SaaS applications.
Okay, so for them, a packaged solution that stores data might be a necessary, albeit temporary, stepping stone.
Exactly. But for the companies that have invested millions in a Snowflake, BigQuery, or Databricks instance, choosing a hybrid CDP is baffling.
It's like you've built a high-performance engine, and then you deliberately throttle its potential by putting a data copying toll booth in front of it.
That's exactly what it is. Choosing an architecture ultimately demands evaluating 3 things: your organization's data maturity, your strict governance requirements, and the level of autonomy your business teams actually need.
Right.
For modern data-driven organizations, a purely composable approach is really the only architecture that scales without breaking. When your IT and data teams stop building manual extraction pipelines for vendor tools, they reclaim thousands of hours.
And that operational shift transforms the culture between departments. Marketing and data teams, historically, they speak totally different languages.
You think they do?
But when the data stays in place, they are forced to collaborate on a unified semantic layer.
Yeah.
Marketing and IT finally share the exact same definition of what a churned user is because they're referencing the exact same logic in the warehouse.
It grants marketing the autonomy to build campaigns quickly without submitting a Jira ticket for every new audience request.
While IT retains total control over governance and security,
It aligns the incentives of the entire organization. You achieve real-time omni-channel enablement because there are no batch sync bottlenecks. The segments update the millisecond. The warehouse updates.
which, by the way, is the core philosophy that drives every single thing we do at DinMo.
Absolutely.
We saw the frustration of these dual infrastructures firsthand, which is why we fundamentally built a truly zero-copy, no-code, privacy-by-design platform. We just don't believe in the some copy compromise.
Because it doesn't work long term.
Exactly. It's about connecting directly to your data warehouse to activate that data with absolutely no third-party storage, no extraction pipelines, and no imposed rigid schemas. We want that supercomputer to run at full capacity, directly fueling your growth.
Architecturally, it is the only sustainable path forward. The market is naturally evolving toward warehouse-native operations because the inefficiency of moving data has just become too high of a burden.
Right. So, to synthesize what we've unpacked today, the hybrid CDP was born from a genuine, understandable desire to bridge legacy vendor interfaces with modern data warehouses.
But when you examine the actual data pipelines, its dual infrastructure introduces baked-in latency, hidden maintenance costs, and fundamental data mismatches between marketing and BI.
For modern organizations, unified architectures centered purely on the data warehouse offer the true path forward for transparency, performance, and agility.
And that transparency leads directly to a massive looming vulnerability for any company still relying on data duplication. Because the technical debate between no copy and some copy isn't just an engineering dispute about compute costs and latency anymore.
No, it is rapidly becoming a strictly enforced legal reality.
Which brings me to a final provocative thought for you to ponder long after you finish this deep dive.
This is the scary part.
It is. We are watching global data privacy regulations frameworks like GDPR in Europe and CCPA in California become increasingly militant. The penalties for exposing consumer data are staggering.
Massive fines.
Huge fines. So as regulatory audits become more aggressive, will the concept of partial data duplication found in hybrid models even be legally defensible in a few years?
Or will zero-copy architectures transition from being a highly efficient technical preference into an unavoidable strict legal mandate? Because if every single copy of customer data is a massive financial liability, how much longer can your business afford to keep making photocopies?
Something to really think about.
Thank you for listening to this DinMo Talks episode. We hope you enjoyed the discussion. See you next time for another conversation on DinMo Talks.